Otsieno Namwaya is the East Africa Director at Human Rights Watch. He's in the studio. Good morning, Otsieno.
Good morning, everyone.
Good to have you here again.
I'm happy to be here. I always enjoy being here.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room. John Allen was our guest in the previous hour. He stays on for a couple of minutes just to hear your words of wisdom.
Yep.
Words from the sage. And CT has the day's proverb.
Yes, I do. Our proverbs for the whole of this week are from the country of Guinea. To make preparations does not spoil the trip.
To make preparations does not spoil the trip.
No, it doesn't.
Otsieno, what do you mean? What do you think this one means?
It means we have always to prepare before we embark on anything. I thought it should have ended with, rather than say does not spoil the trip, it should have said makes the trip better.
Okay, so you've decided to rewrite the proverb. Okay. By the way, it's allowed.
It's allowed.
Yes, it is.
You can rewrite it to.
Yeah, you can rephrase it so that you feel, yeah, now this one I feel. The other one, yeah, they started the journey but didn't quite get there. So now this one gets there. Yes, you're allowed.
To turn it from a negativity to positivity. Okay. So
Or even if you think it's negative and you want to make it more negative, that is also permitted.
it's okay.
It's all right.
It's all right.
It's how it strikes you. That's the beauty of Proverbs. You see, the interpretation is not something that can be limited to what someone thinks. You can say what it was meant to, and that's as far as you go bent. But someone else comes in and says, no, actually, you don't mean the way I look at this proverb.
like John did.
Yes, like
he
John
moved
did.
from a Guinean proverb to a biblical proverb.
Yes, and then stayed in the Bible.
Stayed in the Bible.
And then when he left the Bible, he went to Bob Marley.
Is it? Well, there's spirituality everywhere. You know.
Bas. Today is Maandamano Day. And of course, we've seen the leadership of Azimio that's been calling for this, that has called for these 3 days of back-to-back Maandamano, saying we want a peaceful demonstration. We have issues that we are raising. We'd like the people to come out peaceably and express themselves. Previously, we've seen how peaceably it has ended up being. Police clashing with some of the demonstrators, some demonstrators coming out and not necessarily clashing with the police, but clashing with other people's property, other people's businesses, with infrastructure like roads. Now we're talking about peaceful protest. Is it really possible to have peaceful protest in the country? That's what we want to discuss with you. And previously, John had actually now raised that issue of, what really is the essence of the demonstrations that we're having? But let's start with your view. Is it possible for us to actually have peaceful demonstrations when they have such kind of political backing and push?
Yeah, in every protest, there are usually two groups of people. There are those who come to protest lawfully, but there are also smaller groups of people who take advantage of that and they come to protest unlawfully. So the purpose of asking for police security or protection is basically to deal with the smaller group that comes to create insecurity. So worldwide, though, policing protest is basically something that has been agreed on some basic tenets that need to be followed. And one of them is not to provoke the protesters. So even when police are present, their work generally is expected to be to deal with a smaller group that takes advantage of the protest to do other things, the illegalities. However, what we have seen, and this is my major concern, is that police don't come to provide the security to deal with the people who are causing or who are doing the unlawful things. They come to disrupt the protests. And from the work that we have done, partly jointly with Amnesty across the country, we found that at least for the protests that were there in March, April and May, They were mostly peaceful until the police threw tear gas at people. If you look at the Nairobi protests, the so-called protests in Nairobi, my position now has been that, in fact, in March, April, and May, they were not protests. What we saw was Raila coming out with his convoy and people coming out to greet him, which is completely allowable. But then that changed when police threw tear gas at him and the supporters. What we also found is that police went further than just throwing tear gas at Raila and his supporters who had come out, but they were also throwing tear gas in people's houses. That happened in Mathare, it happened in Kibera, it happened here, it's called what? Jericho Pipeline. And we saw it in Kondele and Nyalenda in Kisumu and many other places. Now that is misuse of tear gas. And tear gas has chemicals that can, if you exhale a lot of it or inhale a lot of it, it can lead to death. And therefore, we are not surprised that out of the 16 cases of death, killings by police, that we documented between March, April, and May, 4 of them were children who suffocated to death because police threw tear gas in their houses.
You know, and John, you can come in here. Going by what you're saying, people come out peacefully. People are peaceful. There's no violence at all until police throw tear gas, right? And then violence erupts. So is the violence directed at the police, or is violence directed at anything and anybody else around them? Because the same ones that you're talking about, March, April, and May, we also saw what was happening in people walking up a road and beating up others and such kind of things. Does that justify, because the police threw tear gas at you, then now you start becoming violent?
There were 2 forms of violence that so far we have been able to identify. The first form of violence, I don't know that to use the word violence though, but let's use it for lack of a better word. So the first form of violence was when police threw tear gas, people responded. First of all, they scattered, and then they responded by throwing stones. Not in all cases did people throw stones, but in a number of cases, people threw stones at police. Then the second form of violence that we saw were groups of people that looked like organized. We saw that partly in Kondele, Kisumu, and one of the people was actually killed. He had dreadlocks. Nobody has ever been able to identify him. People in Kisumu couldn't tell who he was and where he came from. And then we saw that in Kibera. And then we saw that this last protests along the expressway, that group that was vandalizing the expressway at around 10-11 a.m., I think on
Wednesday.
Was it on 12th of July?
Yes.
Was organized. Then we saw that in the group that invaded the farm, the Kenyatta farm in Ruiru. Now, you see, we would not be having this conversation if the government was playing its role and the police were playing their own.
You've not answered my question.
What is your question?
My question is, when you say that these demonstrations are peaceful until police lob tear gas, so what is it that makes them become violent?
And
why
you
is the
asked whether
violence
that's
spread
justification.
to others? Yes.
You know, if you look at trends of demonstrations across the world, you will realize that we haven't even gotten to where South Africa demonstrations get, not even by half. We haven't even gotten to where the French demonstrations were not even by a quarter. So demonstrations, when you have large crowds of people and they are venting, and demonstration is a form of expression. So people express themselves, and there's something they're trying to communicate to the authorities. So it is known that demonstrations, people can vent peacefully, but that peace can also result in some agitation and agitated expression. Therefore, people can throw stones, and that's known. So police, when they're being trained to deal or handle protests, that's the first thing they're trained on, to deal with protests. There are guidelines on how to deal with that. When police are being equipped, when you say train the police and equip them properly, it means give them complete anti-riot gear. And that includes the helmets, of course the tear gas, the way in which it's supposed to be used. And then, of course, they usually have this, it's called what? The shield, among other things. That usually is because they know stones can be thrown. And they're prepared for that, they're armed for that. That is never justification for police to start shooting. And that's why we tend to emphasize the idea of the protesters who are unarmed. So if they were armed, then police can respond to protect themselves or protect another person. But stones is not considered as being armed.
Okay. I mean, it's a view. What we've witnessed as we've covered the protests is yes, there's been a lot of stone throwing, and yes, there seem to be groups that have been organized, right, sort of moving through different parts of the city and the towns where these protests are. But what we've also seen is just, hooliganism and abhorrent behavior by various people. You might call them unemployed, underemployed, whatever, who take advantage of the fact that there's a legitimate protest to now come and do what it is that they're doing. Now, part of the second group that you're talking about, Otsieno. Unfortunately, what then happens is that because of their bravado, many times they push to the front of these protests. And then now everybody else who's there legitimately becomes subsumed by the actions that are happening right in front of them, right? And then now the police obviously instigate a lot of times. Like, do you remember what happened at Serena Hotel?
Yeah.
As they were leaving, remember those protests, as they were leaving, perfectly legitimate. Everybody was peaceful. Our guys were there filming. The police shoot water cannons at them.
Yep.
And then all hell breaks loose across the city. It's as if immediately that was seen, then now that became the signal for doing that. But there's a colleague of mine who works in our edit suite who was just very nearly just missed the violence there. And the people that she was seeing doing this are people from Hamta, like
People that she knows.
people that she's seen, maybe not knows, but has seen. Yesterday I was speaking with someone who got caught up in the violence, and he was beaten up by some of these guys who are also now just, marauding. I think for me the challenge with the protests, yes, it starts with restraint by the people who have the monopoly of violence, who are the police.
Yeah.
It must start with them. So even the language leading up into today is, for me, wrong, right? It should be fine. Your right to protest is protected. We will not tolerate destruction of property, but we will protect your right to protest. We will be there to ensure that you protest peaceably and you leave peaceably. And we will be there to remove elements, criminal elements. So that approach is something that you never see with the police, unfortunately.
So that's interesting that you say that. Yeah. So that my question would be, so then what should we expect to see based on that? Is that if you have large crowds of people, because like you say, if you want to look at protests that take place in Johannesburg, for example, you have tens of thousands of people in the street walking, singing, doing whatever. Are we saying essentially that then a responsible security agency like the police should actually be escorting these people?
Yes.
So that in the event of seeing some of these hooligans that we talk about who are trying to, break into Eastmart supermarket or whomever, the police then would then take over and apprehend those whilst allowing this procession or whatever it is to continue. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. That's such a good example. Like look at what happened with the EFF protests, the ones that you're talking about. If you saw some of the other clips that were coming out, you'd see police assisting protesters, right? Telling them, okay, no, don't go this direction. We are here to protect you. We're here to serve you. And that completely changes the tone and the tenor. But when you're going out there expecting a fight, right? When someone starts by don't go this way. Don't go this way. What are you doing? You're spoiling. You are the ones who are the protesters. Or like we saw in that clip that came from Kisumu, beating a person and screaming, "Ooh, ooh, ooh." That kind of posturing is the one that now sets up the dynamic of how the protest is going to happen, and that puts everybody in danger, including journalists. Yeah.
And this is where now the role of leadership comes in on both sides, all right? So on the side of the police, from their own command structure and then into the political leaders, because the political leaders are the ones who are basically squabbling up here. And the side of the political leaders who have called and organized the demonstration, what should we expect? When, for example, the Azimio leadership says, you know what, we are going all out there, we want to tell the police that we want to be peaceful and we want to tell them, please don't come and beat us and all. What should they be telling the people that they're calling out to demonstrate? And on this other side, what should Kithure Kindiki be saying? That sends the right message, like John, you're saying, that if you come out, you will be protected.
I think on the part of the organizers, I think the very first responsibility is to emphasize that we are going for a peaceful demonstration or protest. And I think that far or that much they have done. Then the other bit is to inform the police. Actually, the law says inform, not seek permission. I think police are totally misinterpreting what that law says. So they're behaving like they give permission and that they can deny the permission. They don't have that authority. But I think this is an issue that we need to seek constitutional interpretation on because we see it's being misinterpreted not just by police, but even by people in senior positions in government who should know. Somebody like Kindiki Kithure is a professor of law. And he should know that he doesn't have the power to ban protests. But going back to the point I was making, so once they inform the police, I think that's where things start going wrong. Ordinarily, what should happen, police should call the organizers, they should accept the notification and seek a meeting with the organizers and begin to plan for the demonstrations alongside the organizers. And that planning includes providing security for the main procession, which is the demonstrators, and then agreeing on how to deal with the people who break away and try to start breaking the law. And the other is to just establish a rapport so that people know that police are friendly, they are fair. The key word is fairness, not even friendly. Protesters tend to oblige whenever they realize that police are fair, not unfair. And that is what is lacking the police. The police start by declaring that the protests are illegal and that they have banned the protests. And that sets the stage for confrontation. And then when after doing that, on the material day, they even make the situation worse. Let me give you an example of what happened in Kitengela on Wednesday. I happened to have been going around. I was even there when the Mlolongo situation was unfolding, and I was in Mathare when the Mathare situation was unfolding. In Kitengela, what happened was very unfortunate because it was just about 5 people who started chanting with placards. And they moved like 10 meters and then came back, maybe 20 meters, then came back. By the time they came back, they had been joined by about 50 people, so the crowd had swollen. I don't know whether the police panicked because I didn't see any reason at all to do for what they did. Because the crowd was very peaceful. The only thing they were doing were chanting on the roads. They had not even left the road. And if I remember well, it was the OCS Kitengela who threw tear gas at the crowd. And that's what caused the chaos.
That's what ended up now with
Yeah.
everything getting out of hand and out of control.
Yeah, and I think police just need to learn that their role is not to come and subdue people. The role of the police is simply to facilitate and manage the crowd.
But they're getting that idea from somewhere. They're getting the idea that that is their role from somewhere. There's a cascading of information from whatever, who, if your boss essentially in the system tells you, guys, this is what we're doing tomorrow, it would take a maverick in that system to stand out and say, well, actually, I'm not going to do that.
But you see, Ndu, that's the thing. It doesn't need to take a maverick. The police service supposed to be an independent institution.
Right.
What we have is the language of independence of the police in the Constitution, but what we have in practice is a history of a police that is an agent of the executive, an agent of the state. It is the muscle that the state then now uses to enforce itself, right? And that's the problem, that the police cannot act independently. They can't think independently, in spite of the fact that, on day one, they were supposed to have been given independence of their budget, etc., etc. You still see who the police report to in practice. That's a problem. For me, another thing that's problematic is leaders who are also part of the protest, using the same language that some of those criminal elements would do. Like, just go to Babu Owino's Instagram. Oh, tear gas is good. We like tear gas. It tastes nice. What are you? What are you saying? You understand? And this is a leader from one of the most populous parts of the city, right? So that's also a problem. And that kind of acknowledgement that we have to be leaders of our people in such a way that we want their lives to be protected, not saying come we fight. You understand? Yeah, maybe it's my misunderstanding of the moment. Maybe in their view they see the moment as having now just crossed that bridge that is now beyond sort of a logical discussion about the law and the protection and all of these things that we're discussing.
What would they be protecting? I think if it is not the folks who are out demonstrating that they were protecting, what are they protecting?
The image of the state, the projection of the state as the leader, as the father. That's what they're protecting.
Wait. So this action that we've just been describing qualifies as protection.
Exactly. You see, in households where the father is the one who comes, he sits down and he reads the paper and everybody disappears. What does he use to enforce this kind of aura? He uses violence, right? But in a family where the father comes home and the children run to him, right? Or the parents come home and the children run to them, what do they use as a tool to be able to run that household? It's a completely different set. It's a completely different mindset.
That's true.
Right? And that's the thing. It is the mindset of the police that is completely wrong, because they are there to serve a person who wants to project power, or an institution that wants to project power. That's why it hasn't changed. In 2013, in 2017, we were back here. Kindiki was out and Matiang'i was in, saying the same things, almost as if they were reading from the same script, right? Go back even further. Michuki was in, Kibaki was in, saying the same things. Why? Because the institution that they lead is an institution that is meant to project the state as being powerful, that can subdue everybody. And that's why we're having a challenge.
I want
that's
to
why
add
those
and
problems
say that is also that it's because of this system of states and the way it's engineered. This is where the issue is. The instructions that come from politicians to the officers on how they should conduct themselves are similar.
Exactly.
Now, whether the politician is on the side that is giving direct instruction, or the other sides, they are similar. Those that are organizing these demos, and I want to put it to you today, the organizers of the demos on the other side of the political divide, who do not have direct access to the power, who don't have direct power to control what is being said, their thinking is the same. And that's why, for them, for us to show that this demo is successful is when we show that we can subdue this system. So they're not coming out to demonstrate and to protest and to voice their views and to air their grievances. They are coming out to subdue the system. So they are planning this demo, organizing this demo at the back of their mind. The demo is successful if we actually clash with the system.
Because to them, the system is unjust.
Is unjust. And it's not that the system is unjust. They want to get into that system and perpetuate that thing. Their issue is not the injustice and the way it's structured. It is, we want to get in there.
No,
So to get in there, we want to get you out. And so they're just clashing with the system, and they're rallying all of us and saying, twende, tear gas ni tamu, or we shall be peaceful. They know very well they'll be peaceful, but on the side they're holding meetings and saying, sasa nyinyi mwende pale, wakikuja hivi mwende hivi. It's all to make sure that there is going to be a clash.
You know what is of interest? Your analogy is correct, because there's a time gone by when the state was authoritarian in the real sense of the word. And the evidence that sort of confrontation bore fruit is this discussion we're having here. There's a time gone by, you would know, you live here, you will be arrested. Just for having this conversation.
Yeah.
That's true.
And if you said too many things and pointed too many things, some document would be found on you which was either communist or it was treasonous, but something would happen to you. You wouldn't just get away scot-free. Now, are we saying that those same tactics are necessary now? Because at that point in time, there wasn't a discussion. No, this dialogue wasn't there. That room for dialogue wasn't there. But does that point to this thing we call dictatorship? Does it point to a state of mind that those who are sent to leadership have, where when you are sent to that position and you get there, then it is you who tells people what to do and nobody should have a discussion with you? And are we saying that mentality hasn't actually gone away?
No, it hasn't.
That those who are in leadership do not want dialogue. They want people who obey and who do what they are told to do.
But yes, control is sweet, no?
So if that is the case, then you would argue therefore then, logically, that confrontation is still necessary.
Well, yes, to the extent that we have systems in power that systems that perpetuate this kind of leadership, or systems that enable it, to that extent, yes, there has to be that kind of a confrontation, because then the law does not serve the purpose that it's supposed to, right? That kind of clash, whether that clash must result in death, whether that clash must result in the destruction of property, is what we are here to really think about and really put our minds to. Like Otsieno said, the instigation of the police at many points in time, and we've been there as journalists, we've also seen it. When the police instigate, it sets everything off. But do the people on the ground, the police and the protesters, even know what it is that they are clashing about? What is the frame of the fight? And I think that's why all of us, both us here in the studio and those people out in the streets, need to really exercise their minds around. Like, what really is it that we are fighting for or against or over, right? And so that way, we know that when we are going there, by the way, Kenya needs to change.
Yeah. It's about, this issue. If it's about the cost of living, it's about the cost of living.
Yeah.
Just, I think in one of those June demonstrations, there was a video going around of one police officer on Gong Road who assisted a lady to cross and told her, okay, now, this is not just go this way. And then he was talking to the people and telling them, guys, you all know, we are here together. We are neighbors, we are friends. All these things that if we start fighting, we will be destroying our neighborhood here. Okay? So let's just not. And you see those kind of instances where police are speaking this way. And of course, the people understand they're speaking this way. But again, I say, those who are up there in the political leadership, in the political class, they do not want this system to change. But, They don't want it to change. Incrementally, they may want, let's change one or two things because that thing was used against me for too long, and I'm not likely to get into this. So let it change so that I have a better chance of fighting this system. But they don't want the system to change. They organize demos so that they can be violent. When because Human Rights Watch and other civil society organizations have organized protests and demos and picketing over various issues, if it's about enforced disappearances, you organize with local communities and people come out, people carry placards, people even walk to the Inspector General of Police's office, they hand over a memo, they go back home. How come they're not violent when you organize the demos? When Human Rights Watch, when Amnesty International, when others, when they organize those protests, how come they're not violent? Why is it that they become violent? Because politician X is the one who's organizing it, and politician Y is the one who's in power, and they're saying, why?
Sometimes it's good to look at these issues with a historical context. So historically, we had a constitution from 1963 that got battered and dismembered. And by the 1990s, people thought that the constitution was no longer serving them. And people pushed for reforms and they pushed for specific measures. One of those measures was this clause that people are tussling about, Article 37, of where the maandamano is now a legitimate form of expression. It's recognized in the Constitution. But even without that, the international law, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, recognizes picketing and peaceful protests and demonstrations as a legitimate form of expression. So that particular law was included there because people know what had happened in the 90s and 80s if anyone tried to protest. And then there were specific measures that people suggested for police, which was one, independence. And people thought that part of the problem is because the president appoints everybody in the police. So they suggested the National Police Service Commission to be responsible for the appointments. And then there was IPOA to investigate abuses by the police. Then what happened in 2013 when what was it calling itself, the digital team that came to power? The first thing they did was to amend the law to allow the president to start appointing the Inspector General of Police. And then they amended the law to basically reduce the power of the National Police Service Commission. And they amended the law to basically undermine IPOA. So IPOA that we have today is not the IPOA that we had in 2011 when the law was passed, and 2012 they were set up, and 2013 they started investigating their first case. It's a totally different type of IPOA.
How?
Let me just bring your attention to something. Has it ever crossed your mind that while IPOA may investigate other cases, there is not a single day they have investigated deaths resulting from protests? In 2017, Human Rights Watch documented a total of 104 people who were killed during protests. We submitted these cases to IPOA. In 2016, during it was called the anti-IBC protests, people were killed. We documented close to 22 cases. We submitted these cases to IPOA. In 2020, during the corona period, a total of 27 people were killed. 2023, we don't know how many people will be killed. But the thrust of it is that since 2013, in fact 2013 also people were killed in Kisumu, I think 6 people. And we documented all this. There's not a single case that IPOA has ever touched. Why is that so? Because IPOA cherry picks what they want to investigate. And and they go for what I would call the low-hanging fruits, the easy, non-sensitive, non-political cases. And you can justify that by saying even during the disappearances and extrajudicial killings in the northeastern Kenya and the coast region and parts of Nairobi, there were a lot of people who disappeared. And we did document some cases. Some of them were very straightforward. Somebody goes to a police station with his brother, and police take him to a room. They want to interrogate him, and the man disappears in a police station. To this day, has never been seen. But you give IPOA those cases, they can't hold anybody to account. Why? IPOA at that time kept insisting they don't want to be seen to be standing on the way of the war against terror. But they miss the point. Generally, the point I'm making is that we clawed back a lot on some of the changes that we made as a result of what happened. And now you see...
And we are in agreement. The thing is, superintended by whom? The same people who are in office today claiming we are not going to allow, and their brothers who are on the other side today saying we are going to force you to do it. Okay? So they're not interested in... Some of those Jubilee people are the ones who are calling us to the streets today. So why was it so easy to start, bastardizing them so soon after we gave ourselves a constitution?
I think it's a question of leadership, like you said. I think towards the end of Kibaki's reign, I think he was convinced. He resisted earlier, but he was convinced that a new constitution and these new measures that were being suggested, they were not just being suggested by Kenyans. I think the Kriegler Commission suggested changes at the IEBC. The Waki Commission suggested changes in the police. The Justice, Phil Palston report just suggested changes at the police, among others. So Kibaki was actually convinced that this was a good thing. And he took off very well, jointly with Raila then, who was the Prime Minister. And all these institutions were set up. But as soon as the Jubilee administration came to power in 2013, we saw two things. One was a slowdown in implementing the remaining pieces of legislation. That's why by 2016, when they should have finished implementing all the laws, they still hadn't done it, and they needed to extend the time period, if you remember. Up to now, there are laws that have never been redone or reviewed, like the Penal Code, the Public Order Act that they're now citing they want to amend to limit free expression. Those were supposed to have been reviewed and aligned with the new constitution. So they slowed down.
Within 5 years of promulgation.
Yeah. So the first one was slowed down. The second one, we saw an active attempt to claw back on some of the measures that had been created, undermining or reducing the independence of the key institutions, the Office of the Inspector General. The Inspector General was supposed to be independent. He was not supposed to be the kind of person who is summoned by Gachagua to be given directives on how to deal with protesters, because then he becomes a political stooge. And that is what caused problems in 2007, because the police were partisan. So it was suggested these police have to operate independently. But now we are back there. Then we saw the introduction of the security laws, which were basically making nonsense of the new constitution. And many other amendments that have been done. Even today, the budgeting process, for example, I'm just deviating a bit, that was envisaged in the constitution is not being followed. So the people who came to power soon after the 2010 constitution have failed to implement the constitution the way it is, and that's why there's even this attempt to remove that provision that allows people to demonstrate as a way of expression. Yeah, and I think Ruto and Uhuru Kenyatta are one and the same thing.
think that from what we see, I mean, look, honestly, we don't know what to expect today. We have an inkling or an idea of what may happen. There's fear, there's trepidation amongst people. But then there's people who still genuinely want to talk about the ills, or rather talk about the tension that they feel having to operate within the country. Do you think that there will be some kind of recompense? Will there be an understanding of the true issues here? Because unfortunately, the battle that we're seeing being played out here is not of the true issue. It's not the true issues.
What are the true issues, and where do we find the true issues?
The true issues are that people are in their houses today, number one, scared. Number two, the true issues is that it may be a global problem, but it's a Kenya problem. People talk about, yes, there's cost of living is high around the world, yes, but it is a problem in Kenya. And they look up to a leadership and a government who say you should at least be able to do something about it and to be able to cushion the people in one way or another.
So you raise an important issue there. The reason, like I said, the reason why people are on the streets is because they're expressing themselves over something. They don't seem to feel like they're being heard. By the time people go to the streets, they feel like the leadership is not hearing them. So I would have expected that alongside trying to get people to stop demonstrating, either by force or without force, the government will be making some serious steps to try and address the grievances that people have. The taxation issue, the corruption issue in the government. It's just like people now forgot about fighting corruption. And then the rising cost of living, which I think this government had committed to many things about. And of course, the careless utterances, the bravado that people say. I think there are a lot of things that you talk to Kenyans and you feel they don't feel happy about. So they expect some changes, like the utterances that Mheshimiwa Moses Kuria, maybe I shouldn't even call him Mheshimiwa, makes under the 2010 Constitution, chapter 6 of the 2010 Constitution, Moses Kuria should not be in office. He should resign. If he doesn't resign, then President William Ruto is supposed to fire him. But none of that has happened because these people don't believe in the Constitution. So I don't know. It's all a question of leadership, whether the leadership is responsive or not responsive. And what I'm seeing is that the leadership is not responsive, and Kenyans will continue to get more and more frustrated. Yeah.
Like Ndu is asking, are these demonstrations focusing on the real issues, or are the real issues being used as a tool to advance another agenda?
I think it is both. If you look at the demonstrations of March, April, and May, it was more of IEBC, the server, and the elections. And if you look at the turnout, until Raila came out to move around the city, the turnout was very low. So it's until he came out, because of his stature, people came out to greet him. So in my view, they weren't demos. But now when,
as in to say hello and then go back, or they just continue to hang around?
There was spontaneous word of mouth that Raila ameonekana, so come.
People came out, and in some places he stood to talk to him. He stood to say hi to them and to talk to them. But now when you look at the current situation, people are coming out in large numbers, even before they see Raila. Like in the last demo, I don't think Raila came out. But the numbers of people who came out were huge. And that means people feel angry. But now with Azimio having the grievances they had before, they are riding the wave. So on the one hand, it is true, people are exploiting this. But on the other hand, it is true that there are genuine grievances that people have that the government is not responding to.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, if indeed the people have their own genuine grievances, why aren't the people organically organizing these demos? Why are the people waiting for Raila to call the demos, for Raila to give an itinerary of where he'll be so they can come and greet him while at the same time expressing themselves. Why not see citizens with their various structures? Because it's not like we lack structures beyond the political formations. We have other structures.
There are lots of organic formations around the country. If you go around the country, you'll see Bunge la Mwananchi. People do a lot of things in Bunge la Mwananchi. There's social justice centers. People do a lot of things in social justice centers.
When the social justice centers organized a cost of living demonstration, right? When was it? A couple of weeks ago, from Jivanji Gardens. They came out. Why haven't we seen them doing more? I mean, what I'm asking is, if indeed this is all about the main issue in the country, cost of living, and you're saying that, now because we can look at the turnout, and the turnout is because people are agitated about the cost of living, why do they have to wait for these other guys who want the servers open and everything else to call them out?
I think all the two issues have merged. The Azimio concerns and the public grievances have merged. So what you don't know is that during Sabasaba, civil society had their own demos, and Azimio had its own demos. But I think because Azimio is more loud and they get more attention in the media, the civil society demos weren't heard about. But a lot of people that were being freed at Central Police Station were actually activists who had been arrested. There are also a lot of other people, about 300 or so, who are still in police cells, have not been freed. And if you look at some of the charges they are facing, like illegal assembly, those are charges that should not be put on people in this day and age under the 2010 Constitution. But people always organize themselves, but that organization takes time. If you want an organic eruption that has no leadership, that takes time. Like the Tunisia situation took some time. People kept complaining for a long, long time until some small thing happened, and that was the trigger. Right now, you can see generally people are angry, and Raila is the only one who comes out to say, let's demonstrate. Nobody else has come out that strongly with a national appeal to call for those demonstrations. That's why it's looking like it is a Raila thing. But these demonstrations, from my assessment, they can take place without Azimio or without a Raila. It's possible that even if Raila yesterday had called off the demonstrations, they would still have happened.
Do people need to be shepherded into demonstration? Do people need a leader who will come out and then people will follow this leader organically? People have a sentiment, it is there, but who's going to then be the one who takes the first step and then bring people around?
If you are talking about organized demonstrations, then they need to be shepherded. But if you are talking about a spontaneous eruption, then they don't need. The thing is, it is better to have organized demonstrations where you have the leader who can call them off. But when you have a spontaneous eruption, it is nearly impossible to call it off when it starts.
Do you think those that are now able to, and they have successfully called a number of these demos, do you think they are taking full advantage of their power and their influence to organize these demos in such a way that it's clear this is our agenda and this is what we are going for and this is what we shall get out of it?
I don't know. I'm not inside Azimio, but from what I've seen, like I've told you, I've been going around quite a bit to see what's happening. From what I saw, there was no organization. Even in Kitengela, what I told you, there was no clear sign that people are being organized. A small group of people just came up and say, oh, today is supposed to be a demo, and they started taking placards and chanting. And I have seen that in nearly every place. And when you talk to people, they are saying, but other than calling for press conference to call for demonstration, Azimio leaders, even MPs, are not doing anything else on the ground to try and organize people to demonstrate. So people come out on their own. even when I hear this thing of the protests are being funded, I get actually very surprised that people in government feel that way. No, if Azimio had been organized enough to do even just 20% of the organization, I think the demos would have been worse than we are seeing today.
Otsieno, thank you very much for joining us. As always, come again soon. Let's observe what happens here. And of course, a call is for peace, for the demonstrators to maintain the peace and for the police to do the job that they are given by the Constitution and the law.
Thank you.
Otsieno Namwaya is East Africa Director at Human Rights Watch. He's been our guest.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.